For questions during this information session, if you could post them in the chat function on your bottom right-hand corner, and we have a person that will be monitoring those, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. And the speakers will address some of those questions right after they speak, but also during the Q&A session towards the end of the hour. We will take a maximum of 2 verbal questions after each of the presentations. And then we would also ask those questions to anyone else with that has a verbal question to please raise your hand either on the screen or using the raise hand function under reactions, I believe, or actually it's under the raise hand button. So I would like to jump right into it and introduce our first speaker, and that is Susanna Nowak. And Susanna is a researcher at the Center for Climate Assemblies. Susanna?
Hi, that's me. Very nice to be here and very nice to see you all. I do have a little presentation to help me out. So I will be the person to give you kind of the highlights of what citizens assemblies or citizens panels are. And my job today is to answer these 3 questions. So this is what you will find out from me. And then over the course of the rest of the meeting, you will find out a lot more from the rest of the speakers. So I'll tell you what a citizens panel is, or citizens assembly, what are they used for and why. So the why is pretty much the advantages that citizens assemblies have as a democratic tool. And I will tell you whether or not they work. And the short answer is yes, but that will come in a little bit later. And then there is a lovely little confused panda that I hope by the end of the presentation will turn into a happy, non-confused panda. All right, so number 1, what is a citizens panel or a citizens assembly? Very shortly speaking, kind of the dry definition is that it's a representative sample of randomly selected citizens that come together to deliberate on a specific issue and formulate recommendations. And there is a whole process of how that all unfolds. There is an educational portion where they learn about whatever it is that they will be deliberating about. And then they jointly come together to discuss and reflect on the problem and come up with their best solutions. So this is kind of the shortest, the kind of nutshell of what a citizens assembly is. So that's the what, and there's a couple of hows that are associated with it. So first of all, it's representative, but representative how? And that really depends on the demographic criteria that the coordinator sets for the assembly. And for the most part, it is representative in terms of gender composition. It is representative in terms of age structure of the community that it is representing, and economic. There's an economic criterion. There is also sometimes a political criterion or any additional ones that are relevant for the issue at hand. But the ones that come up pretty much universally are gender and age, and the district or the state or the neighborhood, depending on the scale of the assembly. I hope that's clear. If it's not, please make sure to post your questions in the chat. And then I said that they deliberate, that they need to jointly deliberate, and there is a how associated with that as well, of course. So how do they deliberate? For the most part, as I said, there is an educational portion where they get to familiarize themselves with like a balanced narrative that surrounds the problem. So they get to hear about the expert opinions and the different sides of the story that surround the issue, and then they deliberate in a facilitated fashion. So there is expert facilitators that help the citizens or the residents and lead their discussion and provide guidance for the discussion, but the content itself and the reflection and the learning comes from the citizens. I can see the chat is going orange, so that means there's some interest around this, but that's nice. Okay, so what are they used for and why? This is the coolest part of this whole thing that I'm doing, the whole presentation of mine, because this is where we talk about what the advantages of the citizens' assemblies are. So what are they used for? Basically, they can be used for any problem that requires decision making, because it is a very universal decision making tool. So I would say they can be used for anything, but they are especially useful for collective action problems, in my opinion. And an example of a collective action problem would, for example, be the environment, all of the environmental issues, because they concern the humanity at large and the community at large. All right, so why are they used in the first place? There are a couple of advantages that the deliberative tools have over some of the more traditional democratic tools, in my opinion. One of which, of course, is the awareness raising aspect. So because the citizens get to listen to the educational portion, they learn a great deal of things that they might have otherwise not have learned or not have been made aware of. So that's a huge advantage, in my opinion. And then, of course, it's a very communal tool. It's very human in the way that it is designed, and the intention behind citizens' assemblies is that we meet as a community and we play off of our most human instincts in that way. So that's my opinion on it. And then, of course, the way that it is designed and the representative aspect of it, the requirement which says that the sample needs to be representative. In that way, the advantage of the assembly versus, let's say, a regular Senate is that it includes notoriously marginalized groups and voices. For example, women or indigenous peoples or people of color, and so on and so on. So yeah, and because of that, there is more understanding in the room of the different perspectives, because it's really people from all different walks of life, so they can bring up viewpoints and perspectives that might otherwise not found themselves in a, let's say, a congressional room. And of course, there is an additional benefit that throughout the process of the assembly, the citizens' preferences are reflected upon, and in that sense, they are also verified. Especially with collective action problems like environmental problems, people often act off of their perceived preferences because they're not presented with the knowledge and the body of evidence and the body of expertise to be able to verify their preferences and really think about what they really want and what they are really concerned with and what their true priorities are and the priorities of their community at large. So those are huge advantages. And then I think we may move on to the third question. Do they work? Yes, they do. So there is several examples already from across the world of citizens' assemblies being carried out with great success in various different designs, because the design always varies a little bit, given that it is always designed and carried out by an independent team of coordinators. But one example, Ireland, right? The assembly that deliberated on the 8th Amendment of the Constitution, which was concerning women's rights, women's reproductive rights, and surprisingly, very progressive legislation, very progressive recommendations came out of that assembly, which might have been surprising given the religious sentiments of Irish people. Generally speaking, there is a certain trend that I'm observing with assembly recommendations generally being quite progressive, whether it's in terms of women's rights or in terms of the environment. The UK Citizens Assembly on net zero emissions, I think they had 93% of people strongly agreeing or agreeing that the government should take decisive action to go towards net zero economy, zero in terms of carbon emission, of course. We've got France, a very recent example. They had the, what's it called? Convention citoyenne pour le climat. And there was a lot of political support. That's a very inspiring example, in my opinion, because of the political support and the pledges at the very highest levels of government, namely the president, who already pledged that he would be adhering to 145 out of the 149 recommendations made by the Assembly. There's also the Europolis example. That's technically a deliberative poll, and it was conducted in an experimental fashion. So it wasn't per se a political tool, but it did show, even as an experiment, that after the Assembly, the support for the Green parties rose quite significantly. So in short, yes, they do work, and yes, it is being done across the world and with quite great success. So that's your question number 3. What I feel is the coolest about citizens' assemblies is that what I've been experiencing, and what I think a lot of people in the US are experiencing, I was in the US in 2016, during the 2016 election, is that people are often feel like that democracy is forcing them to choose between either 2 or more options, out of which neither one they really like, and it creates a lot of hopelessness and helplessness, and people are just don't have a feeling of agency, because they always feel like they have to choose between the lesser of 2 evils. And so I feel like the coolest thing about the assemblies really is that it is inspiring on the personal level to people, and it's giving them a sense of agency, and it's helping to restore the faith in democracy and the political process, and creating that democracy can in fact be used to create good change, and it's not this unreformable system that we are stuck with, that it's not just about the ballots, because the ballots, even in my personal experience, but also an experience of a lot of people, are not very empowering. They don't feel empowering. So yeah, there is a nice and happy panda to conclude this that is no longer confused. And I hope that this answered some of your questions and maybe inspired some more questions.
Thank you, Susanna. I really appreciate it. Nice job. We would like to take 2 verbal questions, and if you could keep them very brief, that would be greatly appreciated, because we want to move on to our next speaker. Any questions for Susanna? There's a number of questions in the chat that Marcin and others have been trying to answer. We'll try to answer all of those in the Q&A.
I'm going to read a question from Bill McPherson that I think would be a good one for Susanna.
Okay.
A practical question. Given the opposition among some elites to popular sovereignty, for example, voting repression, what chance is there for a citizens' assembly to have real power?
The question of what are the chances for citizens' assemblies to have real power is very loaded, because it depends hugely on very, very many variables, in my opinion. It really depends on who's currently in power as the government authorities. It really depends on who commissioned the assembly, and what was the entry point. Because sometimes at an entry point into the assembly, there's already a declaration from the government that they will consider the recommendations binding. And in that case, they can be held accountable if they don't align the policies with the assembly recommendations. But that is not always the case. So basically, a lot of the assembly's power, actual political power, because there's a lot of many other advantages aside from its political influence. But in terms of its political influence, I feel like it really depends on so many different factors. But we do have a lot of examples of assembly recommendations being actually followed and being successful in creating political change. So yeah, I guess short answer is it very much depends, but it's not, the assembly is not politically powerless. So I hope that is at least somewhat satisfying.
It is. Thank you, Susanna. I think we do need to move on. We're behind schedule a little bit. So I'd like to turn it over to Marcin Gurwan. Sorry if I mispronounced that, Marcin. And Marcin, a little bit background there. Is a researcher, a specialist in sustainable development and deliberative democracy, and has coordinated citizens' assemblies across Europe for many years. Marcin, and I think you have a presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about some more details of how the climate assembly in your state could actually work like. There are many experiences around the world, not just on the national level, but also on the local level. With regards to the question of the power of a citizens' assembly, the one that took place in Ireland, I think it was 2 years ago, it actually changed the constitution. This is the Citizens' Assembly on Abortion that Zuzana mentioned earlier, but it changed the constitution through the referendum. As far as I know, in any country in the world, there is not yet a law which would make decisions of a citizens' assembly binding. But it can be binding, just like referendums have binding decisions. For me personally, the inspiration to start organizing citizens' assemblies came from Australia. I read the reports, and that's how the design for the first citizens' assembly on the local level in the city of Gdańsk was created. The citizens' assembly on climate change are called climate assemblies for short. There is one which was completed a couple of weeks ago in United Kingdom, another one in France, and there are many others on the local level, including Cambridge, for example, and other cities. There is also this very interesting case from Belgium, where the first in the world permanent citizens' assembly was created, and I will get back to it in a couple of minutes. So for me, what are the design principles when I think about how should the citizens' assembly organize? The first one, and the most fundamental one, is that democracy is for all. And this principle runs through the whole rules and procedures of a citizens' assembly. And the process definitely should be fair. And it also, in a democracy, it is the people who have the final say. It is also emphasized in some of the rules of the design of a citizens' assembly. Here are some basic standards that we use as a Center for Climate Assemblies when we prepare a process like this. And for example, yes, it is us who create a learning curriculum, the agenda with experts or witnesses. It doesn't have to be only academic experts. It could be like normal people explaining something from their life experience. This was actually the case of Irish Citizens' Assembly. There were women who were not witnessing, what's the word for it? They were describing their experiences of how the 8th Amendment to Irish Constitution what was the influence of this law to their life. And you can listen to those recordings on the website because it's a transparent process. But nevertheless, the Citizens' Assembly itself can invite additional experts. This is like the standard number 4. And definitely what is very important for me, that there is sufficient time for reflection. That's standard number 9. And for example, in practice, it means that in Gdańsk, in case of every citizens' assembly, there was an additional day, and the decision about this additional day was made by the members of the citizens' assembly itself. So one of the principles that I would like to emphasize also is the independent coordination. It means these are the words from the late recent OECD report about innovative citizen participation is that the process should be run at arm's length, by an arm's length coordinating team, which is different from the commissioning publicatory. It means that the coordinating team should be impartial. It shouldn't be stakeholders, activists, politicians running the process. In a sense, it's like a kind of a referee, during the soccer match. I'm not sure if this analogy is good for you in the US, as you have football, but it's a person who is impartial and is not a member of any of the teams. But the governance structure of a citizens' assembly is a bit more complex. Definitely there is this coordinating team which designs and runs the whole process. There is also the monitoring team which provides an oversight, and this team actually can include stakeholders. There could be advisory group supporting the coordinating team with regards to how to design the process and so on. And in the case there is a disagreement between coordinating team and monitoring team, a process of arbitration can be initiated. This is a special process. But there is also one more possibility, that the design for the Citizens' Assembly is provided by a separate group, which has some decision-making power. That's actually the case where from Australia, where, for example, New Democracy Foundation was setting up the process, and the Mosaic Lab, it's a group of facilitators, they were running the process. But the roles could be shared, and this is something for you to consider. Actually, for the state of Washington, you could have a design team plus a coordinating team running the process. But what's the point of all of this? Why bother at all? So from my perspective, the biggest, the most important thing for me is the high quality of decisions that are actually the outcome of the whole process. And that's why I'm in it. That's what I'm in it for. I'm interested in high quality decisions. So, but Zuzana talked about when they are used, but I would like to also explain you why does it work. It works because the decision makers, and it means in this case members of the Citizens' Assembly, are people who are independent. There is no one appointing them, nominating them, and there are no elections. There is just random selection, and this makes them independent. There is a diversity of perspectives in the room. There are people who are young, people who are older, senior citizens. There are people from many different walks of life, and also with different economic backgrounds. And the process starts with a learning phase. So when people reach the point of decision making, they actually understand what the whole topic is about, what are the pros and cons of particular solutions. So, and the stakeholders are invited on equal grounds, and it means that when you are an NGO, for example, you don't need to compete for funding to run a campaign, to buy billboards or something like this to promote our ideas. Now you just come in person to the Citizens' Assembly meeting and you present your position. Or in the case of online Citizens' Assembly, you just join on Zoom and that's it. So, and this one is also very important. So it's not about the political party gaining something like more seats, more influence, more power. No, it's just people coming together to decide what's the best for us. So the common good is at the heart of the whole process. And since the process is run by skilled facilitators, this is a crucial part, the very good conditions for the nice atmosphere is created, and this helps a lot. So, and these are some examples for your state of how could it work. There were some questions about, what kind of demographic criteria is ethnicity, for example, included. Yes, definitely that is the case for your state, for the US in general, but that's not all around the world like this. So this set of demographic criteria is created for a special, for every location. For us in Poland, or for example, for let's say Estonia, the question of ethnicity, the criterion of ethnicity is no, for Estonia, it is important because they have Russian minority. Polish is a strange country. We are very much, alike. So, but definitely it could be gender, education. And in your case, I was thinking about, the counties, but there is such a huge number of them, but actually congressional district could be something better. And since the topic is attitude is climate mitigation, it would be a very good idea to actually check what is the attitude of people to climate change and where is income on this list. Actually, diversity with regards to the background of how much money people make a month or per year is created by all those criteria by random selection and by one more important thing. All participants receive a fee for participating. This is an incentive for people with the low income background. So these are your congressional districts, 9 of them. So your group, like when you would like to reflect at, when you would like to have this state in miniature, people from all congressional districts would be invited to take place in the room or virtually during a Zoom call. With regards to gender, actually, I was very surprised that there are slightly more men in the state of Washington. In our cities in Poland, it's not the case. Usually it's women dominate the meetings, and in some cities it's like even 60% women and 40% men. So there are very like feminine assemblies in Poland. Since your potential number of members is around 100, you could think about one seat reserved for transgender people. So this is the data from the U.S. Bureau of Census Bureau, and with regards to ethnicity. And the strange thing that I noticed about it is that those numbers don't add up. The total is 102. It's a very strange thing, but definitely the coordinating team would need to check it up. And these are the best percentages from your state. And ideally, they should be reflected in the composition of the whole group. There is always this question, what about additional seats for minorities and so on? This is open for discussion. Nevertheless, the general principle is creating a state in a miniature. So this is what the state looks like in miniature. So since there is this proposal of organizing the citizen assembly online, I checked the access to broadband internet in your state. It's 86.5%, so it's possible to do it. And definitely the coordinating team should make sure that people who don't use internet at all should be provided with an equipment, training, and actually access to internet. It could be even mobile or LTE internet, depending on what is available for your state and the situation. So, and the process starts with, once you have a question, with sending out letters with invitations. And this is the first random selection. There are I wanted to say there are 2 methods but actually there are much more. So definitely you can send personal invitations, and these would come from the voters register, but also you can send letters to the households. The difference is that, as I understand, in the US, not everyone is a registered voter. In Poland, it's a different case, because when you are born in Poland, you are 18 years old, you automatically are added to the voters register. You don't need to go anywhere, you are just there. So for us, the voters register is kind of a complete list. But as I understand, in your case, a mixed option, for example, could be very useful: personal plus households, plus possibly also, randomly selected phone number. This is also an option. And this is an example of what's inside of the letter of invitation. This is the real letter from the city of Wrocław in Poland. And this is an invitation from the mayor for a climate assembly on transportation. And it says that there are the dates, there is the fee, information about the fee. And it also says that those recommendations that receive the support of at least 80% of members of the Citizen Assembly, I will treat as binding, signed by the mayor of Wrocław. So, and in these boxes, you can see 20,000 letters of invitations, which are ready to be delivered to the post and then sent out to residents of the city. So the second stage, once people register to participate, the second stage We do it online in Poland. It's transmitted live. There is for example, in Gdańsk, a TV studio, and there is someone rolling a die. So it's a completely transparent process. We also use electronic random selection. Nevertheless, so that there are no doubts about the credibility of the process, but it was about the fairness of the process, we have decided to use a simple dice. And these are like, you know, some of the cool slides I wanted to show. There is this group of researchers from Harvard University and Carnegie Mellon, and they are working on some advanced methods for random selection that include also the criteria of fairness. And this is the cool slide that I wanted to show you. It's from their article about the new methods for random selection. I have no idea what it's there, but it looks really nice. So, and there is always this question about, well, where do the experts come from? You know, how is it that they are, who is choosing the expert? This is actually the question. And the method that we use works like this. The coordinating team asks the stakeholders, identifies the first experts, and just interviews them. What are the topics that should be covered? Who are the experts that would be the best people to present those topics? And that's how this whole list of topics and experts is created. And then in consultation with the stakeholders and other experts, the whole final agenda, ideally as a consensus version, is created. And definitely there could be more experts than the time slots during the program, during the educational phase. Then experts could be asked to record their presentation and provide, you know, written summary of the key messages and recommendations. And this I have just added this slide, you know, before the meeting today, I just to emphasize how important this is. It's really it's fundamental to create a good atmosphere so that people feel comfortable, so that they can speak openly. And that is why, for example, for the city of Warsaw, where the Citizens Assembly is going to take place, start in autumn, there will be the whole first day just for this, you know, integration part. It's planned, so it's integration only, nothing about the topic. It's just for people to feel comfortable. And I would like to also emphasize that the learning phase is open for people to watch, to follow, and it's live streamed. And for example, this is a friend of mine in the city of Gdańsk has connected his laptop to the TV, and he was sitting at home and watching the streaming from the Citizens Assembly, sitting on his couch with his wife, you know, like it was a meeting of a parliament. So this is also an important part.
Marcin,
yes?
we'll wrap up very soon.
Oh, yes, good. So we have mentioned the impact. Okay, that was a quick slide. So, and the French example is very nice because the president of France has committed not just to implement the recommendations, he has committed 15 billion euros within 2 years to fund them. So it's a really like he has raised the stake of the power of a Citizens Assembly. To sum up, the key ingredients for a success: the whole process needs to be well designed. It is vital, especially for the coordinating team, to trust in the wisdom of people who are invited, that they can come up with good quality recommendations. Definitely you invite the best possible experts on the topic, and the willingness to implement the recommendations is also crucial. And this is something just as an inspiration that I wanted to show you, this example from East Belgium, where the first in the world permanent Citizens Assembly was created. It's called the Citizens Council, but actually a Citizens Senate could also apply. And its role is to set the agenda for the forthcoming year, to make a decision with regards to the topics. They can choose 2 or 3 topics, and then the single topic citizens panels, as they are called there, would be organized to come up with, to deliver the recommendations. Is it possible to do it on larger scale? Yes, a European Citizens Assembly has already been organized by a European Commission. And to sum up, This is actually the group of teenagers after the meeting with the mayor of Warsaw in Poland. So after the meeting, the mayor has agreed to organize a climate assembly. The one that I mentioned will take place in autumn. If you would like to learn more about citizen assemblies, here are some guides for you. Actually, the one on the right has been published like a week or 2 weeks ago, how to run a citizens assembly. It was provided by the UK government. If there is something more after the meeting that you would like to, that you may need from me, here's my email address. All right, so thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Marcin. I think we're a bit behind schedule, and I'm not surprised. This is great information. We could take one verbal question, and then I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker, Johanna. One verbal question. Pedro, go ahead with your verbal question. If you could keep it brief, that would be wonderful.
I was just wondering if the whole process has to start at the mayor's office. According to the example given, you know, thousands of letters have to be sent out as an invitation from a mayor. So,
yes.
So my question is the process has to start at the mayor's office?
All right. So this example was related to the local level, like a city level, but definitely it can be a national level. And there are two kinds of processes. The one which is commissioned by the public authorities, and that's our case in Poland. We really want it. Nevertheless, the process can be an independent one. And something like this we are planning in Poland for the next year, an independent climate assembly. Nevertheless, we really want to have the political buy-in of the Minister for Climate because we want the recommendations to be implemented. So this cooperation is hugely necessary. It's not because the aim of the process, it's not just for people to meet, and which is nice. It's not just about coming up with some great solutions, which is nice as well, but it's a democratic process, and its aim is to improve the quality of life. That is why the political buy-in is crucial.
Thank you, Marcin. Thank you, Pedro. I think we'll move on now to Johanna. And Johanna Stevens is a volunteer like myself and others on this call. And she's going to talk about the Assembly for Washington. So go ahead, Johanna.
Thanks, John. Correction, though. My last name is Lundahl, so my name is Johanna.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's fine. But anyways, thank you all for being here. I'm going to also share my screen to give a little presentation. I guess I will just do this. Okay. So, all right. So I am an organizer for the group that is known as Climate Assembly Washington. I've been with this campaign for several months now, and it's a really exciting process because I'm really excited to help expand democratic methods to address climate. And I am just going to start off with giving a little bit of background into how this got started. Let's see. So back in the fall of last year, we had some major protests that started with a big climate walkout led by youth, and then water protectors from the Protectors of the Salish Sea led a march all the way from Seattle to Olympia over the course of 3 days, and then many of them decided to occupy the steps of the Capitol, demanding that Jay Inslee declare a climate emergency, for one, halt fossil fuel projects in the state, as well as convene a special session on climate change that includes the voices of youth, indigenous, and people most affected by climate crisis, as well as to honor treaties to help secure a livable future. One organizer in particular, Michael Foster, was a part of that event and decided to decided to act as a white ally to advocate for the third demand within the halls of the state government. So his first act was to advocate to the governor's office to hold a special session, but that transitioned into advocating for a citizens' assembly on climate. Now, at the same time, in the UK, there was some major protests happening by a group called Extinction Rebellion that were advocating for some similar demands for the declaration of a climate emergency and for major action to be taken on climate, as well as for a citizens' assembly to happen to oversee the changes. They had mass direct action protests across the UK. They essentially shut down London for about 2 weeks. But the citizens' assembly demand was not focusing on any specific climate policies, but it was focusing on bringing a new way of discussing climate policies and a new way of making decision-making to the forefront. So by October 2019, the government of UK had actually had agreed to that demand to hold a citizens' assembly on climate. Of course, they didn't make the goalpost as exciting as Extinction Rebellion had wanted. Their question ended up being, how can we get to net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050, when Extinction Rebellion had been asking them to set that date at 2025. But either way, it was a victory for them, not as big of a victory as they'd hoped, but still. So in Washington State, these different organizations, these different sort of groups allowed us to set this goal of holding a citizens' assembly in Washington as well. And so one of the major questions is whether a citizens' assembly will work for climate. And we think that in Washington, a citizens' assembly would be able to address the breadth and the depth and the intersectionality that is needed to address climate, some sort of climate mitigation. Exactly which aspect of climate mitigation will still be decided later. But essentially, a climate assembly would be convening a political body of people who live here, and without being distracted by campaigns or lobbying or backdoor influence or special interests that are, that impact legislators and senators in the state of Washington. You are convening like a legislative body without the need for politicians, and those people are going to have the incentive to just work through the problem and just work together. And their collective action would be a representation of the type of collective buy-in that the entire state would be able to support certain policies that could come out of the Citizens Assembly. So because we need active public consent when we're going to address this huge issue. Participants will hear directly from experts, public actors, civil society groups, and about the solutions that they propose, and they'll hear a really good balance of all of the significant recommendations, and they'll be able to talk about them in an even-handed way and deliberate with the best of their ability, because climate change is super polarizing and it needs an approach that takes into account everybody. So the first thing that they did was, I'm going to try and speed through this, but my computer is getting a little wonky. The first thing that they did was work on getting the political buy-in from Olympia. What Jay Inslee has gotten very busy lately with the coronavirus pandemic, of course. But one thing that what the organizers here have done was they focused on specific committee chairs who are reflective of the committees in the UK who convened the Citizens Assembly there. So in the UK Council, the Environmental Audit Committee, the Science Technology Committee, the Housing Committee and Local Government Committee, Treasury Committee, Transport, and Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy Committee. Those are the groups that convened their Citizen Assembly in the UK. And so we focused our efforts on getting important legislators to make that same commitment to hear the citizens' will on climate. And on May 31st, these 5 representatives, Jake Fye, Joe Fitzgibbon, Zach Hudgens, Steve Kirby, and Cindy Rue, published this op-ed calling for a citizens' assembly, doing exactly that. So that is the political buy-in that we have, but we are working to get more, of course. Apologies, my computer is not moving to the next screen. All right. So what is needed to happen for this assembly to continue is we are doing, as we're doing now, education and outreach to stakeholders across Washington that are going to be needed in planning the assembly, because we need to center the communities at the front lines of economic and environmental change. As I said, we are still doing political outreach to get more public endorsements from major politicians like the governor, as well as many politicians in the Senate. And there is, we have some funding, but we are going to be doing more. We have a fiscal sponsor by an organization called the Public Sphere Project, whose mission is to create and support public spaces for deliberation and for political discourse. We have some of the upcoming events that are going to be important is primarily the workshop that we are going to host to determine the question at the heart of the assembly. In the UK Assembly had a question of how can we get to net zero by 2050. The French Assembly that Marcin spoke about had a very different question, with how to reduce greenhouse emissions in France by at least 40% by 2030 in the spirit of social justice. So it was broader and it was more focused on the social impacts of climate change. And as we have said before, it was also very effective. So who gets to be involved in setting this question is really important. We need the people who are most impacted to make sure that the focus of the assembly is going to be the most effective and the most useful for all of us. All right, we are also going to be choosing a coordinating organization that will take on the rest of the project within a month. And the people who choose the coordinating group will be made up by half NGO representatives, and then the other half will be made up of legislators and civil servants. We are also going to hold other info sessions, and there are people who can't be involved, who couldn't make it here today, and we want them to be involved. So we are going to be scheduling more info sessions coming up. But also something else we have on the calendar is another webinar event that will be on July 21st. And this is actually a webinar event that is hosted by the Citizens Climate Lobby in DC. And it will be aimed at a national audience with a number of other great speakers, other experts on deliberative democracy. You can find more information on that if you go to our website, climateassembly.us, and there will be a link there for you to register. So we really want everyone to, if you are a representative of an organization, an NGO that is a stakeholder group, please contact us. We are going to continue to be doing this outreach and education, and we want everyone to know about Citizens Assembly and get involved.
Thank you, Johanna. I really appreciate it. Great job. And we will move on. Let's see, a time for a very brief verbal question, and then I'd like to move on to our last speaker, and then I think we're all willing to stay on for Q&A. One verbal question? Oh, Pedro, go ahead. You're on mute, Pedro.
Okay. All right. No, this is the last presenter.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about civil servants. You know, do you actually mean people who work for the government?
Yes, we do, because in setting the scoping question of the assembly, we would like to also have their input because they would be the folks who would be charged with implementing recommendations that come out of the assembly. So we want the focus of the assembly to be as targeted at helping us and helping the state as possible, and their input would allow us to set a question that would be most effective at creating change. I mean, in addition to the input from stakeholders around the state.
We'll take one more question from Barbara, and then I'd like to move on to our last speaker. I'm sorry that we're going over here. Barbara?
I was just wondering whether we might have tribal reps on the group selecting the coordinating committee. And I also think Joanna may have just misspoken because she was talking about involvement in setting the question. No, that's right. But anyway, so would the tribes be represented on the selection of the coordinating committee?
Yes, we have. We are still defining exactly how the coordinating committee will come together, but we definitely know that there will be tribal representation. It's one of the, yes, it's in our language of how we're going to create the coordinating selection group.
Thank you, Barbara. So I'd like to open it up now, if you're willing to hang in there with us for verbal questions primarily. I see that Ed and others have been answering questions in the chat, which is great. And I know we don't have time to touch on those, but how about we focus on some verbal questions to get some other interaction here among us all. So yes, Rick. You're on mute, Rick. Rick, you'll need to take yourself off.
There we go. Now we're ready. The climate issue is obviously bigger than Washington, and while we need to act locally, I am also convinced that we need to act internationally to respond to this crisis. And I'm wondering, how do we gear up? How do we expand what we're doing here in Washington and what's been done in Europe? How do we expand that to a true international council?
Well, I could address that, but I think that that's an amazing idea. I would love to see that in the future. I think that the way we do it is to show how citizens' assemblies work on like a statewide level, and then maybe a national level, and then really make a the citizen assembly model be something that is just the go-to across the world for making and deliberating really complex topics. Marcin, did you want to add anything to that as well?
Okay. Well, definitely. From my perspective, it's not just climate. There are many issues which are in a kind of a gridlock, just because of how the political system works. So from my perspective, improving the process of democratic decision making is definitely a key. It's a way out. And there are any proposals in our model, all proposals are on the table. This solution, that solution, other solution. It's like a rule. The widest practical range of perspectives should be included. The voice of the women's councils, definitely. The voice of young people, definitely. And it's our role that those perspectives could come from people who were not randomly selected. They just come to present it. We identify those groups. These groups can be formal, informal, and we just invite them. So for us, we have this role that we don't select them. Unless there is a huge number of groups, they can by themselves choose who will be the representative. So it refers to the rule of fairness. And with regards to scaling it all up, there is one slide I would like to share with you. It's a slide which Well, you know, we have started in Poland a couple of years ago. And right now, let me just share my screen. Right now, it looks like this. So a fairly new concept, and we have started on the local level, but they are spreading. The map shows you the cities where the citizens' assembly have been either organized or is planned. That's Warsaw, Krakow, Poznań. In Wrocław, it has started, but it was stopped by the lockdown. So definitely, there is something which is called a deliberative wave around the world. And currently, there are more than 200 cases of the deliberative processes which were included in the OECD report.
Thank you, Johanna and Marcin. Did that answer your question, Rick?
Well, I think it answers it about as far as we can go at this point. Perhaps someone in the chat suggested we need to learn to walk before we can run. And certainly local exercises teach us how to use this democratic process.
That's right. Thank you so much.
I would recommend people attend our webinar on the 21st, because that webinar is going to be aimed at a national audience, introducing citizens' assemblies around the country. We are coordinating with a group in New York City called City Atlas. They're also affiliated with the New York City Extinction Rebellion chapter, as well as in DC, the Citizens Climate Lobby, who are trying to introduce the concept to many other places, and that will get the ball rolling for other people to say, hey, this is a really complex question, and I don't think that our representatives have the ability to address it, so we need the people to.
Thank you, Johanna. By the way, on that, the info sessions on the 21st, Rebecca Willis from the UK, who also is heavily involved in climate assemblies, will be on that call, I believe. She was going to try to make it today, but had to drop out due to another commitment. So you'll get to meet her next time. Any other verbal questions? Pedro. You're on mute, Pedro. You're still on mute. Oh, there you go.
Regarding the 21st webinar, was it what? 21st of what?
Oh, 21st of July. That's coming up. It's in another week and a half.
Pedro, the Ed Chad just put the information with a web link in the chat, so you can click on that and go right to it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ed. Any other verbal questions?
I've seen Dylan with a hand up. Did you want to ask your question, Dylan?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand. So I represent Sunrise Tacoma, which is a part of the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth-led movement. And I'm wondering in what ways you are planning on centering youth voices, especially because we know that Indigenous people and people of color are really disproportionately impacted, but my generation is going to be living with the impacts of this in a different way than most of y'all's generations. And so I'm wondering like what ways y'all are able to center youth voices.
Speakers?
So from my perspective, there are two ways of including young voices. The first one would be to lower the age of for the participants. The usual one that we use in Poland is 18 years old and up. It could go down to as low as 15 years old. That's the case of United Kingdom. And the second, but however, this would give you, by proportions of the demographics and so on, just 2, 3, maybe 4 people in a big assembly. I wouldn't say it's a representative of the young people. So the other option is to organize a workshop for young people, and they would come and present their opinion, their position to the whole assembly. From my perspective and experience, this is more powerful, and this is how we have done how we have included the voice of young people, even from the middle-age school. It's a gymnasium. I don't think that you have this level of education in Poland, in US. But that's how we have done it in the city of Gdańsk. Zuzana, your take on it?
On the inclusion of youth.
Youth.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that the most impactful way that I can see it being done is to invite them as a contributor, not as participants, because as participants they would be a droplet in the entire sample, and if they are invited as a contributor, that voice can just resonate a little louder. So I would agree with that.
I would also encourage the Sunrise movement to act as a stakeholder and participate in our workshop to determine the scoping question of the assembly. How that's going to work is that the groups that are going to join are going to have the opportunity to send in their proposals for the scoping questions for the assembly, and maybe about a week before the assembly, about a week before this workshop for the scoping question. And then everyone will receive beforehand, they'll receive the total number of the proposals, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion with all of the stakeholder representatives about narrowing down exactly what the scoping question will be. So if Sunrise are participating in that process, then you have a really big influence on what the focus of the deliberation in the assembly will be all about. That's really important.
Thank you, speakers, for answering Dylan's very important question. Other verbal questions? We only can see what's on the screen, so.
Heidi has her hand up.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jason. Heidi?
Sure.
Yes, I'm calling from my car because I'm at my mom's dentist appointment. And I've got my mask on to be protective. At any rate, I'm calling because I thought I should ask. Before I ask my question, can I ask Dylan a quick question?
Sure.
Do we have time?
Well, we're beyond time, so yes.
Okay. So Dylan, and I just joined because I was on a compassion course workshop. That's like a monthly thing for me. But Dylan, I'm wondering if you are connected with the Redefined Tacoma community. I used to live in Seattle, and I really have been active on their page to stop the LNG 253 LNG frack gas refinery in Tacoma. So I'm wondering if you're connected with that at all.
Yeah, briefly, stopping the LNG has been a huge part of our movement, and obviously, we're a little bit late on that, but we're still focusing on ways that we can prevent the harm that it's doing. And we are not directly in contact with Redefined Tacoma, but we know about each other and sometimes speak together.
And they'd be an awesome place for you to join their Facebook profile or their Facebook group so that you can post your activities there, so that you can get more traction with them. And if you want, my name is Heidi J. Viertaler, and feel free to, if there's anything I can do to help you, point you in the right direction.
Okay, Heidi, what was your question?
Yes, I'm wanting to know if you folks have the Hydro-Quebec issue on your radar at all. Do you know anything about what Hydro-Quebec is wanting to do up here in New England that Hydro-Quebec wants to ramrod this huge mega dam project sourced electric corridor through it's called the CMP, New England Clean Energy Connect transmission line corridor, and the power pools from that emit a lot of greenhouse gases,
Heidi,
and it's really
Heidi,
not good.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that's a really important question. I think if you could pass that on to Johanna, and we'll try to get you an answer. But if you have a question that specifically addresses the climate assembly we're planning, that's
Well,
what
I would like to make sure that this gets onto the agenda because the pristine Maine wilderness that's going to be impacted by this huge corridor about the size of New Jersey, the corridor would be cut through about the size as wide as the New Jersey Turnpike, and that's a lot of pristine Maine wilderness that's a carbon sequestering resource on our planet.
Sure.
And I think that that's an issue that needs to be addressed and
Heidi, I think
and put
will be, we can certainly tag that and we'll bring it to the assembly perhaps, but
okay.
so much.
So how can I get in touch? Can I give my email in the chat and then she can reach out to me?
Please, yes,
Okay,
please
great,
give me an
thanks.
email. One thing I could say about that is just that well, right now we are advocating for a process. The actual recommendations and the ideas that will come out of the Citizens Assembly will be, which is our goal, to have great ideas and great policies created that are created by the people and have a direct link to the lawmakers who have already agreed that they're going to listen to these ideas and either at least respond to them in the press or put them into their concrete policy proposals. So the actual, focuses of them, that's going to be defined by participating in the scoping question workshop, and then who is going to be presenting as like panelists during the Citizens Assembly, and by the assembly participants themselves. So the actual policy proposals aren't going to be made by us. We're just advocating for this to happen so that better democracy exists and more like movement around these issues happens, movement that includes everybody.
Yeah. And it is the scoping question that will define what the assembly addresses. So that's yet to be determined. Thank you, Joanna. Any other verbal questions?
I was wondering if you would explain.
Barbara, your audio is pretty choppy. Maybe it's your microphone. There we go.
Is that better?
No, not much.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Just explain more what we mean when we talk about the scoping question and the process of developing the scoping question.
Sure. Marcin, do you want to address that from your experience?
All right. So the point is that it is crucial how the question or the remit which is posed to the Citizens Assembly is phrased. So is it broad? Is it just narrow? How specific it is, and so on. And definitely there are many ideas. When you consider climate mitigation, there are so many things you can focus on. You can focus on agriculture, you can focus on transportation, or energy, and even improving energy efficiency. That's the topic, for example, for Warsaw, plus promoting renewable energy. And there are many ideas. So from my perspective, and also the experience, it is best when people come up together, they put those ideas on the table, they look at them, and they conclude like together, what is the best option? What is the best question from their perspective? And ideally, the authorities would be also involved so that they could have a look at those questions and say, all right, we like those in the terms of, not that they're our favorites, but also that we are open to implementing the recommendations of the Citizens Assembly, whatever they are. So that's why you need everyone around the table.
Thank you, Marcin. Other verbal questions?
I would like to say that I will have to go very shortly because I have other commitments. But before I go, I would like to briefly address the first question of Rex, actually, about the international scale of citizens' assemblies, because this is what I research, and my thesis was actually about the inclusion of deliberative tools in global governance. As soon as I defend it, you're welcome to read it. But hopefully to inspire you all a little bit, there is already, the first global assembly has been announced, and it's organized independently by, I think, Deliberative Democracy Institute from Australia. So it's not so far off that we can't see it. It's kind of on the horizon. And I think that one thing about any democratic tool at all is that in order for it to be effective, there needs to be trust. And trust is built over time. And I really believe that the more citizens' assemblies there are, and the more out there this idea gets, the more trust it harbors. And the more trust it harbors, the more support from organizations like the UN or other international bodies can be onboarded, so to speak. So in terms of, we already mentioned the Europolis, or the one that was commissioned by the European Commission, the assembly. So that's an example of an international assembly. And the global one that I mentioned, it's actually about genome editing. So a very interesting topic. And it's not, like I said, it's not something that is so far out there that it's going to happen only 100 years from now. It's already happening. And I think it can only pick up from here. So that's my take. And I think I will be going. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Susanna. We look forward to seeing those published papers from your research soon. Not to put pressure on you. Any other verbal questions?
I just reposted this great question from Nick Manning earlier in the chat. He asked, we've had plenty of COPs since Kyoto. What would be different about this than what exists within the UNFCCC and other international frameworks?
Maybe Marcin? You're on mute, Marcin.
Sorry, guys. I'm just turning on my headphones. It will be easier for me to speak. All right. What's different? The UN process, the United Nations process, has started around 20 years ago, and they are making progress in terms of the language that is used, and now it's more progressive, and so on. And some people say it's so wonderful, but where are the, where are the results? It's all my personal perspective. Are the missions going up or are the missions going down? That's the key question. So definitely the use of citizens' assemblies could be included in the UN process. Nevertheless, again, it does require a buy-in of the national governments. So, and you have different governments. You have your US government, you have Chinese government, you have Polish government, and Hungarian government. So it's everyone needs to just agree on it. So it's not like there is this UN body which can enforce things. It just doesn't work like this. So the nations are sovereign, and they can do whatever they wish. So for us, the use of climate assemblies is to be able to show this is what people think about this issue, and this is what they recommend once they have learned about it, once they have talked about it for some time, once they have digested this issue. These are the recommendations. So this is the country in miniature proposing you to as to the authorities, this is what should be done. Nevertheless, we are still talking as a citizens' assembly as complementary to current political system, but it could be designed in other ways. But it will be a topic for a different call.
Yes, there's lots of topics for other calls, I'm sure. Thank you, Marcin. So I think we're going to have to end it there. I know people have other important things to take care of, including this one, continue on this work. So I think we're going to close. Any parting words, very quick parting words from any of our speakers? And Marcin?
Well, I would like to just emphasize that the inclusiveness is one of the basic principles And definitely the one that we use is inclusion of all stakeholders. That's the word that we use. It's very important for us. So for us, any groups and all groups are invited to participate. This is like obvious. It's the principle of democracy is for everyone.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll end it there. I'd like to give special thanks to our speakers and our team that's behind the scenes here, Jason and Ed. And thank you, Johanna and Marcine and Susanna, who left us earlier, and especially Paul. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you all for participating in this information session. So thank you and enjoy this beautiful day in Washington State. Take care now.